Hi, today we'll take a look at carbohydrates. You're probably familiar with lots of carbs already. Carbs are, of course, carbohydrates for short. They include things you eat like bread, cereal, pasta, rice, potatoes, candy like those gummy bears, which are really, really bad for your teeth, but really, really good for your soul, simple sugar, as well as fruits. Last time we looked at this chart of macromolecules, which we discussed were really, really big molecules needed for living things, and there were four main ones: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Today we are focusing on carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have a monomer of a sugar molecule. So think of the monomer again like a bead making up a long necklace. In this case, the long necklace is the carbohydrate, and the repeating units, the monomers, are the sugar molecules. Carbohydrates store energy and make structural materials, and of course, an example is a potato. So the monomer is a simple sugar. We have a fancy term for a simple sugar, and that fancy term is monosaccharide. Mono means one. A monosaccharide is made up of a single sugar molecule. Some examples of monosaccharides include glucose, fructose, and galactose. These each have the same chemical formula. The chemical formula is C6H12O6, but the structural formulas differ. So you can see glucose right here, and galactose and fructose, and they have some differences if you're looking at the different bonds and how the atoms are arranged. Some examples, again, where they're found. Glucose is found in sports drinks like, for example, Gatorade. Fructose is found in fruits. Honey contains both glucose and fructose. And then galactose is called milk sugar, and you can find it in lots of different yummy cheeses, for example. The O's ending, the OSE, stands for sugar. Okay. Isomers. Glucose and fructose are considered isomers because their structures are different, but their chemical formulas are the same. Remember the donut from last time, and we were saying how carbon is able to form rings? Well, it does just that when it's forming simple sugars, monosaccharides. In fact, in aqueous solutions, monosaccharides form these ring structures, and they're often represented like this. So why are monosaccharides important? They're actually the main fuel source that cells use. So if you remember, the cells break apart the sugar that you take in, and in this case that sugar is a monosaccharide. It breaks it apart to release energy in the form of ATP, and that energy is used to do all the things that you do, basically work. So walk around, have your heart beat, have your brain work, send messages to the rest of your body. All of this requires energy, it requires ATP, which it gets by breaking apart these simple sugars. Disaccharides. So if you take a look at that word, it begins with di, and I want you to think of two every time you see that word part di, or you can think of double. That also begins with a D. So a disaccharide is a double sugar. It has two sugars that are linked together, joined together. They're made by joining two monosaccharides. So sucrose, for example, right here, is made by joining a glucose molecule with a fructose molecule. This reaction, remember, building these big polymers, or in this case it's not that big, it's only two pieces, but building these polymers is going to take dehydration synthesis. And in this case, in dehydration synthesis, you're going to remove a water molecule. You're going to have that as a byproduct. The bond that they form with each other right here is called a glycosidic bond. Common disaccharides. Okay, first we have sucrose, which is table sugar, which you might put in your coffee or your tea. And if you're putting sugar in your coffee, and you have to rethink your priorities. Sugar does not belong in coffee. That's a crime. Okay. Lactose is milk sugar. You find it in milk. Some people are sensitive to this. They cannot break down lactose. If that's the case, you'd be surprised to know that you're actually normal, and all the people who can break down lactose are the ones who have a mutation. They are mutants. And then the third one is maltose, which is a grain sugar. If you've eaten Whoppers, you've had maltose. If you like Whoppers, then great. Okay, polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are complex carbohydrates, so they are longer than disaccharides or monosaccharides, and they tend to be quite long and quite complicated. They're composed of many sugar monomers linked together. And here are some examples of common polysaccharides. The first one, actually these are the glucose monomers. If you take a closer look, each one of these is a glucose, and they're all linked together to form this really long chain. So you can see the person in this picture is some kind of farmer, and he's holding a potato, and potatoes contain a type of polysaccharide known as starch. Okay, the second one you can see is pointing at the man's skin, and that is because the animals have this polysaccharide known as glycogen. And then the third one, pointing to the plant, is cellulose, which is a type of plant fiber. So let's take a look at each of these one at a time. So our first time is starch, which is an example of a polysaccharide in plants. Plants store starch for energy. Potatoes and grains are major sources of starch in the human diet. You can see starch right here, and some of the sources below. Okay. We're going to take a pause to talk about how these starches are digested and what happens to them in the body. Okay, so starch, of course, is a type of carbohydrate, and carbohydrates like starch start to be digested inside of the mouth. So your saliva actually has these enzymes in them. In this case, it's called salivary amylase. Okay, you can see it right here, salivary amylase, and it begins to break apart the starch from really long polysaccharide chains into smaller polysaccharide chains and even disaccharides. So then the food gets chewed and swallowed. It moves eventually to the stomach, and carbohydrates aren't broken down in the stomach, so it basically just keeps going, and it keeps going. And when it arrives at the small intestine, here the pancreas is going to release pancreatic amylase and break apart the starch into disaccharides. So now we have sugars that are 2 sugars long. Okay, carbohydrates that are 2 sugars long. There's the pancreas, right? And we have the small intestine. Okay, afterwards, while it's still in the small intestine, other enzymes will be released, and they will break the disaccharides into monosaccharides. So now it's just 1 sugar long. And now those monosaccharides can be used by the liver and stored in the liver, and the rest of the stuff is basically going to pass out of the body in feces because it cannot be digested. And we'll talk about, so fibers will be, for example, excreted and released, and we'll talk about fibers next, which is something we can't digest. Okay, glycogen. Glycogen is the polysaccharide that animals use to store sugar. Glycogen is similar to the way starch is, so if you look up here, they're kind of similar, and it's because both of them are made of glucose monomers. Animals store their excess sugar in glycogen. Muscle and liver cells, that's where you're going to find most of your stored glycogen reserves. Okay, when your blood sugar levels drop, you start to get hangry and really irritated and really hungry at the same time, your liver cells are going to break down the glycogen and release that glucose into your blood. Okay, cellulose is the third polysaccharide that we're going to discuss, and it is the most abundant organic compound on Earth. It has long chains that are locked into these sturdy bundles, and they form like these really strong rods. And it's an important building material for wood and for plant stems. It is also known as dietary fiber, so this is where fiber comes back. Okay, here is cellulose. You can see it's like these microfibrils that end up, they're composed of all the long chains of sugar, but they're really strong and they give structure to plants. Okay, so Cellulose is also known as fiber, and animals cannot get nutrition out of fiber. They can't break it down properly. It's really, really difficult to digest. However, termites, woohoo, termites, here they are, termites. They can break down fiber, right? And they can, like make a lot of damage in homes, like eating through the wood in your home or your drywall. And grazers, like cows, for example, and sheep, can break down fibers. And the reason they can do it is because they have these bacteria that live in their digestive system, right here, bacteria that are in their digestive system, and they help them break down that cellulose. So if you got really, really hungry and you were stranded somewhere and you didn't find any food sources, you can't just sit down and start eating the grass, because you can't derive nutrition from cellulose. Okay, however, humans do need some fiber in their diet because it helps your digestive system run smoothly and move along as it's supposed to. So a lot of the things that we eat have fiber in them, like, for example, fruits. Okay, sugars in water. Simple sugars like monosaccharides and double sugars dissolve readily in water. Back to the coffee example, coffee is mostly water, so if you dump some sugar in it, it will dissolve. It will dissolve. Should you do it? No, but it will dissolve. They are hydrophilic or water-loving. Philic means that it loves something, and hydro is water. So sugar does dissolve in water. And part of the reason why this happens, or really the reason why it happens, is because of this OH group, which makes them water-soluble. And if you remember, this group is a functional group, which we learned about last time. Right here are the functional groups, and you can see right here the hydroxyl group, there's the OH, and this is something that's going to give the sugars their soluble quality. Next time we will be talking about lipids, but I hope this was helpful and provided a good introduction to carbohydrates.